So with that, I'd like to this is a panel discussion. I'd like to pass it over first to our moderator, who will be Jeffrey Williams. Jeffrey works at Berkeley in IT. He comes to us from the University of Minnesota. Been here almost a year. Welcome. And Jeffrey is working remotely from Minnesota. So with that, I'd like to hand it over.
Building successful remote working relationships. I want to thank Michael for introducing and serving as our session moderator today. And then for the panel, I'll moderate the panel. We've got a great slate of panelists, Sarah Bailey, Robert Amos, Charron Andrus, and Clarissa Fermin. And we've got a slide just about that. But before we get to that, we've got some guidance and expectations for today. Let's try to keep the questions and answers general due to the nature of this being an open and recorded event. And although remote employees, although we are remote employees, we aren't remote policy experts, and we'll focus on sharing our experience as remote employees or hybrid employees. And just wanted to say that. So here's me, and here are our wonderful panelists. We've got Robert, like I said, Robert, Charron, Sarah, and Clarissa you'll be seeing today throughout our panel. We've got a Zoom poll question to start off with, though. And Erica, whenever you're ready, please open the poll and we'll do a poll question. So what is your current feeling about remote work? All right, 55 answers already. Lots of people here, 100%. So, wow, I'm going to hit end poll and you guys are going to see, and it's 39%, 39 of the people strongly in favor. So it's 67%. We've got 22% in favor, 7% neutral, and 3% opposed. No one strongly opposed. So there might be different reasons that people have for why they're in favor, why they're opposed, why they feel the way that they do, but I really want to thank people for answering our poll question. Now, I think we've got a second poll question. I don't know if I can trigger that. Oh, there you go. So this is, would you change employers to enable or to continue remote work? And when we're done with this one, then I'll let you know my feeling on this one. Wow, 68, 69 responses already. We've got a lot of people in here. There's more that have joined, so we're doing a poll question, everybody. And I think this is probably enough. So we'll end this one. So would you change employers to enable or to continue remote work? Got an amazing 63%. So a lot of the people in this session are really in favor, it looks like. And not so many, a quarter are opposed to that. And then 13%, that's where why they're in their current job. And that's actually the case for me as well. And all right, so I'll hit the share results. Oh, there you go. Now you guys can see the results. So I guess I'm not surprised, especially after the answer to question 1. So we'll see how will we do throughout this by looking at the answer at the end as well, and then see if we've been impactful or not. Okay, so I'm going to close down the poll and let's get into our discussion. So there's all kinds of statistics out, and there are all kinds of news every day. It seems to be someone's talking about the great reset, the great resignation, the great this, the great that. And for a lot of people, that's a big theme out there in the news. But for us individuals, right, that's our life. Either you have decided to switch jobs, you haven't decided to switch jobs, you've switched employers, or you've changed to working remotely or not. And things like that. We've got some stats up here that we found when we were looking around, but this stuff is so live and changing every day. Who would have thought that 2 days before our session, a large California employer would announce that everyone has to go back or they're fired, sort of a thing. But then the very next day, the employee union, the largest in Germany, would then go and respond back like, you can't treat people that way, like, and all kinds of things in between. It's a tug, right? A tug and pull between. You've got people owning big downtown buildings, wanting those buildings to rent out and wanting to have people working in those buildings, and the vendors that work and have offices and have shops in downtown areas wanting to have people there, but also individuals who, for their own reasons, maybe they want to be able to live in the country and have 40 acres and also have a remote job because they feel like they can get the same amount of work done. So it's interesting discussion and all kinds of directions we can go with this. I'm going to skip past the rest of that. Some numbers about Berkeley IT. So we've got about 300 staff in Berkeley IT that have filled out a survey about, it wasn't just a survey, it was kind of the request form to be able to continue remote work. 142 of the people who filled it out, they wanted to stay fully remote. 72 wanted a hybrid situation. 7 wanted to be or had to be on full-time on staff because of things like the data center and being able to manage the servers there. And then of the student workers, there's about 50 student workers, 95% of them have chosen to work remotely. So that's sometimes it's because of the nature of the job, and sometimes it's because of other reasons. Maybe it's commuting or things like that. Now, let's open this up to our panelists and start to get their opinions, not just mine. So a question for the panelists, and if anyone strongly wants to answer this one, just let me know. But if you've worked remotely before the pandemic, and I think this is the case for Robert, how has your remote work situation changed over time? Robert?
Yeah, hey Jeff. Real quick, I think people are having some issues seeing the slides. They're in like a vertical format.
Oh,
Is there a way we can make them bigger for everybody? Sorry to interrupt you there.
sure. I can. Let's see, so if I hit to share, that's going to share the whole screen. My screen is actually vertical.
So while he's trying to fix that, I'll go ahead and answer the question. So hey everybody, I'm Robert Amos. I'm the Cloud Operations Manager here at Berkeley IT. I've been working remote for a long time, not just at Berkeley. I've been here at Berkeley for about 1.5 years, so I'm pretty new to Berkeley IT. I live up in Northern California in Mendocino County, so I'm not too far away from campus, but I'm still far enough where I'm fully remote. So in my previous employment, even before the pandemic, I was working remote for a nationwide company. And there were a couple big big changes that happened when I went from working remote non-pandemic to working remote pandemic. The biggest one is the emphasis on remote tools, remote learning tools like, obviously Zoom, being the big one, remote training, DocuSign, virtual desktops, and cloud services. While before the pandemic, these were still all available, but nobody really heavily leaned into them and used them. And once everybody went remote, or majority of people went remote or hybrid, these tools were widely used, and more people got to learn little tips and tricks how to work on them. So me being remote and the rest of my team being not remote pre-pandemic was a little harder for me. And then once everybody went remote, it was a lot easier because everybody started learning these tools. Everybody started collaborating better. So I felt it helped us collaborate more as a team remotely when everybody or a majority of the people are going remote. So that was one big change I noticed. And the other big change was, this might be specific to IT, but we basically have a lot of physical equipment still at the office or in our server room. And we always would have somebody that was hybrid that would be in the office or full-time in the office. So we could rely on them to, be hands-on when we needed someone to change a cable or change a server out or change that. And now with most of my team specifically being 100% remote, we don't have that reliance on our team to do that. But having said that, we are now working with the local data center teams and other side teams like our storage team to have them do some of the help for us, which is brought in even a bigger collaboration with multiple teams and brought our teams closer together, even though they're not the direct teams, there are other teams in Berkeley IT. So those are two big changes that I've seen that have benefited me greatly and my team greatly with being fully going from remote pre-pandemic to remote full-time remote now.
So it's a little easier now, would you say, to have those meetings with other teams? And it sounds like it's giving you more reason to have meetings with other teams because you're sharing some of the hands-on keyboard sort of resources, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a feeling about this question?
I can chime in a little bit. I've worked remote and hybrid for 2 UC campuses as well as in private industry like Robert. Worked for a company that actually decided that their entire corporate office was going to shut down and be fully remote. And I think for me, the biggest difference always being in IT, pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, was the fact that when I was working fully remote or hybrid before, it seemed like it was majority of IT groups that were doing that. And you really didn't see administrative, help desk, just non-IT kind of functions that were also either fully remote or hybrid options. And so what we saw, like Robert said, was, everybody had to go remote basically because of the pandemic restrictions. But even now that we're kind of coming out of those lockdowns and people are able to, there's just a lot more variety in the types of jobs and roles that are considered eligible for remote. And it makes the relationships and the understanding about the impacts, good and bad, of remote work easier for everyone to understand. I think before the pandemic, again, when it seemed like it was a majority of IT, there was like a disconnect in like, how are you doing your work? You're not in the office with me. So like, how could you really be doing what you're supposed to be doing or producing what you should be producing? But now, because they also have that experience, they also see how they're able to be successful and perform. It's just an easier relating ability between different types of teams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it's that way. Let's move on to our next question. And okay, so we've got concentration, we've got distractions. I just now had a bit of a distraction, right? Because of the issue about the screen orientation. But in the office, at work, at home, at work, where are the distractions? Where are you free from distractions? Where do you get the most work done? Where do you get your best work done? And I think Clarissa might have an answer about this one, about her experience, and maybe others on the panel as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think I'm one of the lucky ones, although I do miss having little kids. My kids are all grown up. And so they're not at the house during the day. So I do have that quiet time during work hours. And when we had the fully remote situation started, I've talked to the family and let them know I'm going to put a sign at my door and I'm going to say, Mom is working. Don't bother me if it's not an emergency. And also have a dedicated space. I think it's very helpful to have a dedicated space in your house. It can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be a specific room where it's a little bit more quiet, and a dedicated time and at work hours. And try to just be consistent with that so that your coworkers also know when to expect you to be working, and reflect that on your calendar as well.
Now, do you have a lot of emergencies that happen, or did you?
They're just hungry all the time.
Can you make an apple for me? Like, the apples are just there. Just go get an apple, right?
I have some additions to this one, actually. I have everyone knows I have a dog and I love her. She's amazing, but she barks at very inopportune times. So one of my best suggestions for whatever your distraction situation is at home, one of my best suggestions is to build a relationship with your coworkers about your distractions. So if it's your kids or your dog or whatever. So for me, I had a little graphic that I had drawn when I first joined the team that said my dog is barking, so that when I was on a Zoom call and I just suddenly muted, I could hold up the little cartoon and they would kind of get a chuckle out of it. And it's just a way of sort of building a relationship and giving them a tiny glimpse into your home life, because you work from home. You don't have a sort of work interaction situation. So if you take those interruptions and use them as opportunities to build relationships, it can be really beneficial. So now everybody knows I have a dog. They love to see her on camera, and they understand if I mute that she's gonna, if I mute that she's barking, and I'll be back in a minute.
How about you, Robert?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Clarissa on the dedicated space. So when I was working remote a long time ago, the dedicated space was just my like the dining room table. And I found that I was always going to that dedicated space even after hours of work. So keeping a space that was just not floating around made me concentrate at work when I was there, but not when I was walking by. I wouldn't go, I forgot to send that email. So it would be kind of dedicated in my garage or in a separate room. So I agree with that. But the other piece is I'm big on being the cloud operations manager. I'm big on cloud tools. So I have a cloud tool that basically mutes a lot of that background noise, the dog barking noise. I also have a really physical keyboard. So a lot of people used to hear me type, and that was very distracting, not to me, but to other people. So a lot of my distractions, I'm really worried about what other people are being distracted by my sound. So I purchased a piece of software that helped me do that. But nowadays, Zoom and Google Meet and all those tools integrate that in there. So there's a lot of times I hear people say this all the time. It's like, oh, sorry about my dog in the background, but the tools are actually muting that out. So a lot of people can't hear it. It still might be a distraction for you, which is, I like Sarah's idea with letting people know, hey, I have a dog, and everybody knows I have a dog now. But a lot of times the tools are great to prevent the distraction from distracting other people as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've had the situations where people on the team have had lawn mowing going on outside that was distracting them, right? Or construction work being done nearby in the neighborhood. All kinds of different things. Let's move on to starting to talk about the technology and the tools that folks are using. So we've got things like Zoom and Google Meet, and there are settings that I encourage everyone to take a look at, like Robert had just mentioned about being able to filter out the background noise and things like that. What technology tools are you using most effectively? That's different than just what are you using, and do you have any tips and tricks? And we'll probably go across the entire panel for this one, because we all probably have something that we like using the most to help us with remote work. And it might be a little cliche, but I'm going to say having a good camera, because before I was always blurry, and then I felt self-conscious about it, and nobody could see my Berkeley bow tie. Now, for a more serious answer, let's start over at Sarah and go all the way through the panel. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, that sounds good. So I have a lot of tools on my list, and I don't want to sort of step on top of other people's answers. So just so everybody knows, I'm the content collaboration service lead. So that means that I manage Google Drive, Google Shared Drives, Box, and SharePoint at UC Berkeley. And so I'll stick to that family of tools for my suggestions. So I think everybody kind of understands Google Drive. That's kind of the primary collaboration tool on campus for the most part. But also Box can be a really good collaboration tool because it can serve as a content hub. So actually in Box, this is one of my best tips. In Box, you can actually create a Google Drive doc or a Microsoft Office doc in Box, and it'll be stored in Box, but you can use those online editing tools to edit the file. And so you can have the collaboration, but keep everything stored in a central location regardless of the file type. The other thing that Google offers is Google Jamboard, which is it's like a whiteboarding tool basically, but it has sticky notes and things like that. And to go along with that, Box now has Box Canvas, which is a competitive tool. It's just a really nice whiteboarding tool, but I think it does have a few more features than Google Jamboard, so I encourage you to check those out. And I will pass it over to Clarissa.
All right.
Sorry, I was muted. I love everything you've mentioned, Sarah. It's actually almost everything that I find useful in my work. But I do want to mention that what's really important for us being in the HR area is the use of DocuSign or anything for digital signatures. We find that a lot of our forms need signature, and so it's very helpful for us. And Charron?
So I'll talk just a little bit about maybe some of the tools that we use to connect with others and engage with others, because that's often one of the things that people kind of talk about when they think about not being on site and being remote is how do you engage? How do you, get that coffee room break conversation that you used to? How do you get that experience? And so I know in Berkeley IT, we leverage Slack very heavily, and there's other types of chat tools out there. Google has a chat function, email, the way we connect. So those are very important. And I guess the tip or trick that I would say is, use the tools, don't let the tools use you. And because what can happen is that, especially when you're remote, it's the constant need to check your emails, the constant interruptions of Slack. You may be in a meeting, you're getting pinged. And so really figuring out the settings for these tools, how do you mute certain notifications if you're busy or you need focused time? How do you set up your dedicated time to review your email so you're not constantly in it all day and eating up your time where you need to be focused and productive? And so just really looking at how to use those tools best for you, as opposed to just constantly being in them, constantly being at the beck and call of anyone who wants to Slack you or chat you, because again, that can become almost like the person who stops you in the hallway for the 5-minute conversation that turns into an hour discussion that wasn't on your calendar. Robert?
Totally understand that. I've been there before. And let's go over to Robert next. And one thing I want to throw out there is that these tools, we've been accumulating them into a document. And at the end, we're going to share it just as a little carrot to keep people around. And Robert, what do you have on your list of tips and tricks?
Yeah, so I think I jumped the gun on this question. I just mentioned some tools before, but one of the things I want to mention is more of a feature of a lot of these tools, which is the video piece. And I find that with my team and a lot of IT folks, they don't like to be on video, but we found that being in video is really helps with communication, trust, and inclusion. One of the things that my expert psychologist says, which is also my mother, she basically said that most of our communication is done via facial expression and hand signals. What is that called? I'm drawing a blank. What she said here. She's gonna gesticulation. Let me put it this way. I should know that word. So a lot of it, when we communicate in person, we kind of take this for granted because we're already doing that. We see each other. So one of the features that my team has slowly, gradually gotten to was everybody being on camera, and it's built a better team relationship and a lot more trust and stuff. So utilizing those tools, like Charron said, to work for you, not you working for the tools. But that's the big one that my takeaway is the video helps, but it's hard to get people moved to that. They like to stay a video off.
So
it also helps with a lot of miscommunications. A lot of times in text and email, you'll say something, but it won't come off. It's hard to interpret that. If someone's saying it more face to face, it's easier to interpret their face. Like when I was drawing a blank there, I was fishing for it. Hopefully you could see that in my face.
Yeah.
And just to follow up on the camera comment, we recommend that everyone have a really good light, a front-facing light. If you don't have a good window, get a ring light or something, because it can really, really help your experience.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And on the hand signals and things, like if somebody is talking about something, it's really helpful. Yeah.
I do just want to chime in on the video thing, is that we also need to be sensitive to our colleagues. We don't know everyone's situations and why they may or may not be comfortable on video. So again, just being, a little bit sensitive. Maybe if you're a manager or a leader, having conversations with your staff about maybe their discomfort. It could be a social discomfort. It could be a setting discomfort, whatever it is. But just having that sensitivity, because everyone is not in the exact same position.
That's a good point, Charron. And it reminds me of before the virtual backgrounds were a thing, how that would be even more of a concern for folks, right? Like if some student was having to join a class from like their room, and their background is their messy unmade bed, versus someone joining and they're in like some space that looks like a beautiful library or something. And now look, all of us on the panel, we've all done it. We've all put a virtual background up so that it's more of the message we want to send rather than just the situation that we happen to be in at that moment, right? So let's take a look at the next question here. So how do you manage hybrid meetings? This is going to be more and more a thing as folks that were staying away start to go back a day or two a week sort of thing, and then others that are going to be remote fully, they'll be interacting with each other. How's that going to work out? Love to hear what people think about this one.
I can start off. Being someone who worked, again, remote prior to the pandemic, when, again, there was a lot more people on site, than remote. One of the things that I know I struggled with, and others who were in similar situations, were meetings. And so you have, 95% of the people in the meeting in the room together, and, a few folks on the dial in or on remote. And there's the struggle to hear what the people in the room are saying. Maybe they haven't placed the microphone strategically so you can get everybody, or their side conversations. And so we really have to be thoughtful now as we come into this place where we are primarily going to be hybrid. There's going to be a lot of people remote, a lot of people on site. And so how do we make sure that everybody can connect, everybody can engage? And so one of the big things here at Berkeley is, if you have access to some of the Zoom room technology, which allows everyone, even if you're physically in a room together, to also kind of be in Zoom. That way everyone can hear you, you can share, you can connect, you can use all the tools that Zoom has, and everyone kind of is on the same footing. But if you don't have access to that, then my personal suggestion is that everyone log in to Zoom, because again, that puts everyone on the same playing field, and it doesn't disadvantage anyone who is dialing in or logging in versus those who are physically present in the room.
And we were talking about background noise and such earlier, and the grounds folks just now decided to start using the weed whacker outside, but hopefully it didn't come through my microphone. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to certainly be a change for some people, but it's really similar to what was going on when you had remote people on a team before the pandemic. So, I think we can manage. If we've managed all the changes to get to this point, I think we can handle this one too. Let's go and transition to talking a little bit more about, yeah, exactly, the relationships that we build with the coworkers. So these tools enable it, right? The tools enable us to talk and communicate. And as we do so, we form relationships with coworkers, working relationships, we build trust, and we get things done. How do you build trust with your coworkers is the question, and love to see who would want to take a first crack at this one.
So I'll start with this one. I actually had a conversation with mine and Jeff's supervisor about this the other day, and he gave me a lot of really great suggestions and feedback about the question. So I think that the two primary things that I want to emphasize are responsiveness and getting your work done, and surrounding those two things, establishing your expectations and being clear about your expectations. So if you are a remote employee, whether or not your supervisor is also remote, whatever the team has established as the standard method of communication, whether it's Slack or Discord or Google Chat or whatever your tool of choice is, be responsive on that tool, because there is, whether it's true or not, there is a perception or a misperception that if you are not responsive, you are not working. Now, while that may totally not be true, you might be in, no distraction mode. It tends to feed that feeling to the person who's trying to communicate with you. So if you can be responsive, or if you're working on something and you need to be focused, you can put up an away message that says, I'm in focus mode, I'm working on a project, I'll be back in an hour, or whatever. I'm just establishing those communication guidelines. And the other thing that I mentioned, getting your work done. And so if your employee or you are consistently not meeting your deadlines, or not getting things done that you should be getting done, whatever they may be, obviously that's going to be a break of trust, regardless of whether it was intentional or not, right? So if you can establish your expectations with your supervisor, or if you're a supervisor, establish your expectations with your employee at the beginning of your working relationship, it will help greatly smooth out those situations. The other thing about being a supervisor and supervising remote employees is there is a really big concern regarding inequity due to proximity. So people who are working in the office for any amount of time versus people who are fully remote, it can be perceived as though those people who are local are getting more opportunities or more attention, more one-on-one interaction with their supervisor. So it's really important that supervisors focus on equal attention and opportunity for your employees. And the other thing is establish psychological safety in meetings. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but when you're a remote employee and everyone else is having little water cooler conversations, you might not feel comfortable saying some things or expressing some concerns. So as a supervisor, you should make sure that you are establishing that psychological safety. And so the takeaway for the supervisors for me is deliberate inclusion and equity is the key to a smooth work environment with your remote employees.
Now, this is a really important question. So I hope to hear additional, like others' perspective as well. But I think Sarah just made some great points and really put some thought and time into it, even discussing with others, etc. Clarissa, you look like you moved your head. So is it okay if I call on you?
That's okay. That's totally okay, Jeffrey. I was just also thinking about what I have heard from some of our leadership too. They're actually currently discussing, and Charron, I think you might be familiar with this because you're in the same meetings as our leadership team, that I think they are noticing that they do want to make the staff feel that that our meetings are equitable or equal, and that it's not going to create inequity. And Sarah touched on this when she talked about making sure that everybody feel that they belong to that meeting. So sometimes, for example, if there is one individual who is going to call in or do a video call and everybody are in the office, I think there would be some type of discussion or determination whether are we all going to do a Zoom call instead or a Google Meet, so that that one individual working remotely will feel that he or she is a part of that meeting. And so that it shouldn't create a gap or anything like that. And the other thing I wanted to say is that for me, the only way, and I think it should start from the beginning when we hire our new staff, is establishing that open communication and being able to, I'm an individual contributor and I do appreciate the constant communication, checking in by my manager, and Jan is here, so I would plug the Achieve check-in conversations, really, really helpful, but also during the one-on-one. So I think just regularly asking, how are you doing, for both the staff on site and for staff on remote.
That's a really great idea. I feel letting the folks who are remote or on campus have kind of the same equitable experience, right? Robert, I saw you unmuted. Do you have something to say about this one? And
Yeah,
so,
Sarah had some great points, and I'm just going to expand on one of hers with the feeling that when you're in the office, you're getting a little more attention. One of the tips or tricks that my directors or managers do on our side is the open office hours on Zoom. So they will have weekly scheduled or even by 2 times a week scheduled meetings where anybody on the team can join. So if they really need to feel they need to do a face-to-face, they can, and the managers are always there and available during those times. I found them helpful, especially when there's like IT issues that I need to, email is not going to convey the actual issue, or when I need to move my hands more, that helps a lot too. So, but that's just an expansion on what Sarah said there.
Yeah, that's great. Charron, or I'll say something and move it on.
Yeah, I'll just add, as someone who joined Berkeley during the pandemic, 100% remote, and having to build relationships with both my staff and the other leaders in Berkeley IT, I think one of the things that you have to do is be intentional about it. It doesn't necessarily grow organically like it might if you're all in the office together and seeing each other, passing in the hallways and various, eating lunch, whatever. So you kind of have to really say, I'm going to do this, and then figure out what your plan is. Be it, the open office hours like Robert, online office hours like Robert mentioned, setting the expectations with your colleagues and your staff about when you're going to be available, not available, like Sarah mentioned, the open conversation, like Clara said, setting specific meeting times with various people to get opportunities to have potentially non-specific work-related conversations, again, to start to build that personal connection and those personal relationships, I think is very critical. If you're managing staff, you're not managing staff, I think just being intentional and actually reaching out to people and saying, hey, do you have time for a 15-minute chat, a 30-minute chat on Zoom? I just want to connect with you, see how you're doing, where we can engage goes a long way. And I'll save my equity point for some other part of the conversation, because I'm sure we'll get back to it.
All right. No problem. That's it's, again, great information and great ideas from everybody on that question. And some of those naturally lead into the very next one, which was, how do you build your network? What's worked for you? I've got a little bit to say on this one. And so when I started in Berkeley IT, they have this program called the Buddy Program. So when you join as a new employee, they have you paired up with someone else who's been there longer than you have, and might have some knowledge of the kind of role that you're in, but isn't on your same team. And then they facilitate meetings for you with different teams that you need to know, and with different people that you need to meet. And I found that to be very valuable. I work as a system administrator, so I got to meet other system administrators on other teams, either if they worked with Unix or Windows or whatever for the platforms and things. And that was very helpful to start that process of building the trust and building a network with other people. And when you meet people, I would try to remember something about them. So when I talk to them again the next time, it's not just, oh, you look familiar. It's like, oh, how's the such and such going? Something like that, where I can be a little bit closer and more intentional about making those connections, right? How about opening this up to the panel? Anyone take it? What's worked for you for network building?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. One of the things that I like to do, it's more of an annual thing, but we focus a lot on training and going to training classes. Obviously, with the pandemic, a lot of it was online training, but we still try to hit our annual big, like say, cloud meetup training, and we use that also as a team building activity to get everybody to come on site and to do it. Now, this doesn't work for everybody because of travel and so forth, but we try to do at least once a year a meetup with the whole team, and that helps with the networking. It helps us meet other members of the team who are in the office, or we try to coordinate times when the other teams are going to be in the office as well for hybrid employees. But yeah, I think it's really big to still, even though you're remote, to still have those at least once a year kind of meetups and kind of meet the team personally, even though you've met them obviously in plenty of Zoom meetings.
Yeah, it's funny when people say that meet someone, like, oh, are you going to meet the team? Well, like I've already met them. I've been on 14 Zoom meetings with them so far, and we're connected on LinkedIn. Like, what do you mean? Of course I've met them. Oh, you mean in real life? Well, does a phone call count? Like some of us, So, oh, just to let everybody know, like I work remotely from Minnesota, and some of the people on the call here work remotely from different places. I think we missed that at the very beginning. But just for a second, Robert, where do you work remotely from?
Yeah, so I'm still in Northern California. I'm up in Mendocino County, which is a couple hours from campus, but I'm still fully remote. But I'm in California.
And then Charron, you're part-time hybrid, right?
Yeah, I'm a mix, or will be more of a mix as we move more towards return to campus. But primarily, I work remote from Sacramento. That's where I live. I'm in Atlanta a lot because my partner's business is there. So I'm also oftentimes on East Coast time, which actually works out pretty well because of the 3-hour difference. Can be on really, really early and get a lot done. And then I do come into the office. Usually I do 1-week stretches just because it seems like it makes more sense if I'm going to come, that I come and I stay for multiple days.
I've got to jump past Clarissa for a second because we've got another East Coaster over there at the end with Sarah. Sarah, you're on East Coast time.
Yeah, so I work in Cleveland. I live and work in Cleveland, Ohio. And it's interesting, we were talking about time zones. I work on East Coast time, and that in itself has its own challenges. But as Charron mentioned, it is actually, for our team, it has turned out mostly to be advantageous. So I start early, and I actually hit a lot of our ticket or incident response before the rest of the team has even woken up and started their day. And I think it's nice for them to wake up and not be faced with quite so many incidents to deal with. The other thing is I have a lot of quiet time to get things done. Now, the issue with doing that kind of time shift is that my day finishes at 2 p.m. Berkeley time, which means I'm not necessarily available for meetings after 2, and you would be surprised how many meetings happen after 2 p.m. So my team has been incredibly gracious and have, for the most part, shifted the schedule to meet my schedule needs in the afternoons. But there are times where I have to work until 6 or 7 o'clock my time because there's a meeting that just can't be moved if it's a larger meeting or presentation.
Yeah, and we really appreciate being a member of your team. Really appreciate your early mornings, and you know, like to have some. We support services that have to run 24/7, right? So like having somebody working early and some people working later, we then have so much better coverage than if we were just in one time zone. Clarissa, though, let's go to you.
I think I'm the closest to Berkeley. I'm about 20 minutes away. I'm working from home in Pinot.
All right. Let's go to the next question and move forward.
Yes,
So
can I just add one networking tip? Because I think it's a really good one that you can use not just when you're a remote worker, but just building your network in general. Is one of the things that I do is I take note of who's in meetings or who's at a conference or, you know, someone speaking about something. And if there are things that kind of resonate with me, or it's things that are going to impact my team, or there's cross, you know, collaboration opportunities, I just take note of those folks. And then I reach out and I say, hey, I saw you at this meeting, or I heard you talking at this conference about this thing that really resonated with me. Can we get a quick meeting on the books to chat? And that goes a long way to building your network, not only where you work, but again, you can use this across the board, because I hear it a lot from folks when they're trying to build their career networks and people that they can reach out to for mentorship or whatever it may be. And that's a really good way to get on their radar and have a connection with them from the get-go.
Oh, I think that's really great. It's the follow-up, right? It's like lots of people lose by not following up. And if you've got the follow-up game, you're gonna be able to network much more effectively than others. And what I like also is, who else do you think that I should be talking with? Or who else do you think that I should meet? Just a simple question like that can get you, you know, you're meeting with somebody, and just ask that one question and they'll think about it. And especially when they first meet you, that's the best chance to be able to then pivot to meeting others and being able to build out the network of folks. I think I had asked Robert, and then we did that whole introduction thing. I don't know if on the networking one, if we got to everybody that wanted to. Clarissa or Sarah, did either of you have anything that you wanted to add on the networking one before we go to this question?
I think the only one thing that I could think of right now is the Java with Jen. Our AVC and CIO will have Java with Jen monthly. Sometimes it's done virtually and then sometimes it's in person. And I find it very helpful. I hear some great feedback from people saying that, oh, I finally met Jeffrey. I finally met Sarah or Robert or Charron or other people from within the department. And we also invite people that we constantly work with. Sometimes our HR business partner was there one time, Carol Salerno. So it was just nice to see and have a little chat with people. It's a very informal event.
Yeah, I
Right.
think it depends on the receptiveness of your organization. I'll just preface that, but don't be afraid to move up the ladder and ask for informal virtual coffees or set a quick 15-minute meeting with someone who's in leadership, just to get to know them and let them know who you are and what you do and how you want to support them in their organization. Skip level meetings. So that you can build those relationships and they know who you are. They can rely on you for certain things, right? It's really good to get your face out in front of people at all levels in your organization.
Especially people that you would be seeing in person if you were working in person. If we're working remotely, we don't have an equivalent, right? Like maybe there would be a 5-minute hallway conversation or a 10-minute or something that you might otherwise miss out on. So you have to kind of make that happen yourself, right? So we have to be a little more proactive as remote employees if we want to build the same network and have the same connections that we would. So let's take that. And we went from talking about building relationships. Before that, we talked about the tools that help enable that. Before that, we talked about just remote employment in general. So we go remote workers, the technology to connect them. We've got the relationships of coworkers. Now we've got to talk about how are we going to be working back and forth with our supervisors or with our reports. And then we've got one more section before we go to the Q&A. So no, but we'll stick with that first one. So how do you encourage a positive relationship between remote employee and a supervisor, given the lack of in-person connection? For me, I try to take some of the advice that Sarah had earlier, things like be very responsive. And I'm going to share one of my little tricks. I have a filter in my email so that if any of my coworkers, not just, well, I mean, everyone's important, but if any of my coworkers send me a direct email, that I'll get a note over in Slack. So I'll hear 2 notifications for that email so that I can respond very quickly to them and be right with it. So that's one tip that I use related to that. But it's also just being forthcoming with things, like make sure you get the any roadblocks or things out of your mind and into notes or into a communication with your boss to make sure that they know what you're facing and what they can do to help to clear roadblocks out of the way so that you can be successful. That's my take on it. How about panelists?
I already said a lot about this, but I'll just add, if you're having a personal issue at home, make sure you don't have to say what it is, but make sure you communicate that you may have delayed responses to your team. I know sometimes we don't want to talk about stuff that's going on, and I totally understand and respect that. But if you communicate, just I'm having an issue, I'll be back in a couple of hours, it's an emergency, whatever. Just make sure you communicate those things.
That really helps with trust, right? To let people know a little bit so that they're not wondering and having question marks. You don't want question marks. You want certainty, right? When you're working back and forth with your supervisor. Charron, you're a manager. Do you have any specific or general, or do you have any feedback on this question?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any relationship. It takes time and it takes effort. So you can't just expect it's going to be trusting and grow just on its own. You got to kind of put some time into it. I think one of the things, and Sarah mentioned it earlier in the conversation about really being transparent about expectations, making sure everybody understands what the expectations are. That's a really good way to start off the relationship, on a good foot. I think also for a manager, really working with and understanding your team and making sure that there's opportunity for everyone to give feedback, collaborate, and understanding who are those who maybe are going to, you have the ones who want to talk and they share and they always have their ideas, and those that maybe are a little bit shyer or a little bit more conservative. And so making sure that you have a variety of options for people to participate and give you feedback, what they need, what they don't need. One tip that I do have for managers is I do one-on-ones with my entire staff every other week. And the first section of that check-in is what I call general check-in. That's where they can talk to me about whatever they want to talk about. It doesn't have to be work related. It could be a personal thing. It could be training. Whatever they want to talk about, we talk about in general check-in. And again, that's that opportunity to build that personal relationship, build that trust that you don't, that isn't just going to come when you're remote, that sometimes those kinds of conversations just happen when you're on site. And so building that into my one-on-one check-ins with my staff allows us to build that relationship. And again, it's open to them and they can say whatever they want. And then over time, you build it. And so they may share more personal things or, things that they're struggling with. And again, just encouraging them that you are there to help, you're there to support them, and you're there to make sure that their career and their time with you is beneficial for them and not just for the organization. It's really a humanity thing, I think.
Oh, I was muted. You sound like a really great manager, is what I just said, and we're really lucky to have you. Let's move on to that next question. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So, has anyone found something difficult about working remotely or managing remote employees, and how are you addressing that? That's something where we've got various level of vulnerability we could share on this question or not. So, just try to find a nice, safe way to answer it.
I think just me being new to Berkeley, there's often things that are said relative to the campus, especially when it comes to IT. There's like specific buildings that are used for certain things or locations where certain activities are housed. And because I have no concept of the campus, I'm lost a lot of times. Like it takes a lot more for me to understand. So that's probably been the most difficult thing for me, is like really kind of orienting myself to the campus, how it relates to IT, the functions of IT and the services of IT, so that it makes sense in my mind when people, talk about Warren Hall, I'm like, what's Warren Hall? Data center. Okay, yeah, I got it. That kind of thing. So for me, that was one of the challenges.
There you go. Sarah, did you have one?
It's just, I think the standard answer for any new remote employee: how do you meet people? How do you know that Joe Smith is the person that you need to go to for this thing? It just takes time, and it takes more effort on the remote employee's part to get to know people.
Anyone else, or we'll start moving on to the next one where we're talking about how to make the case to be a remote employee.
So I just want to add real quick, everything Charron and Sarah said but the big thing that I found with my team when I first came on board, a lot of people weren't used to the remote, so the communication wasn't as open and as frequent as it should have been, because people aren't used to that. They're just used to, hey, yelling over the cube or the office, say, hey, did you fix that thing? Yeah, it's fixed. So one thing I found with my team is not super detailed, but more detailed than I just solved the problem or okay, spelling it out a little bit more so you can get that clearer communication. Because I found that was the most difficult thing with my team, is someone just would say I would take care of it, and then not really, if I was in the office, say, well, how did you take care of it, or what fixed the problem? I'm just curious. So just keeping that communication, and communication is everything with trust. So that keep it a little more detailed, help my team build that trust between not just the trust, but get it working better and communicating better. So.
Well, I just to make sure we don't leave her out, Clarissa, if you've got anything you'd like to say on this one.
I guess, again, I'm one of the fortunate ones. I don't find it difficult to work remotely. I think I would say, not directly to me, but sometimes I'll go down on the technology side. The internet is bad, so that becomes a challenge. But again, we just have to communicate that to our supervisors or our managers and the team that we're going to be working with that day. There are so many other ways to tell people what's going on. And then I think also getting some help, because, for example, if your computer has a problem and you need some help technically, then you really have to wait or find the right person or team to help you. And so I think I think the campus in general has done a great job in communicating that and posting all the contact information in the service desk number. So I think that's helpful.
Oh, that's really great to mention help, and that there's help available not just for technology issues, but also for supervisory questions and issues as well. Berkeley's got a wealth of resources to help people be able to do those things well. And if you are a supervisor and don't know exactly how to handle a situation, there are groups of supervisors that you can meet with and HR staff as well. Some of the great folks that help contribute to putting on this whole event, right? So with that, sometimes even myself as an IT professional, I was having some issues with a computer. I called ITCS and they helped me, and it was great. So kudos and a little shout out to the ITCS folks who take those incoming calls about Berkeley IT issues. Now let's go to the next one. So we've talked about how you're going to work with your supervisor and how you're going to network and all these different things about being remote. How do you make the case to be a remote employee? Do you have a job where your job is to go into the data center and turn on the servers that need to be turned on, or to reboot the servers that need to be rebooted, to unplug cables and plug them in again? Like what's the role that you've got that, and I think for none of us in this panel, is it a job that actually needs the physical interaction with hardware? So there are jobs that would need to have people work directly with hardware, or to be sitting at some desk interfacing with the public. What jobs don't need to be on site though? What's the converse of that?
So I think that's kind of a loaded question, because there's other business needs other than just interacting with hardware that could potentially be a necessity for a job to be then considered. It needs to have some kind of physical presence. So what I will say is that every organization has to kind of look at their roles, the business needs and expectations, and then based off of that, then review their positions and say, these are the positions that can be done fully remote. These are the positions that can be done hybrid, and these are the positions that need to be on premise. But you kind of have to have that. What is your business need? What is your business expectations? And then you start doing your review of jobs. And I think that also helps it be an equitable review, because if you start doing, I'm just going to make up something, but we're reviewing business analyst roles in IT, and then you've got business analysts who work, in another division of the university, and they're doing the same type of work, but because you're not bouncing it against just the straight, what are our business needs, what are our business expectations, you can have disparity in how remote versus hybrid versus on-site is applied, just because there just may be a different culture in one department versus another. And so if you kind of take some of that personal preference from management, some of that personal comfort with the idea of remote work, and really just focus on what is our business needs and what are our business expectations, and then apply it to roles, I think you will come out a lot more equitable in the long run when you start talking about what needs to be on site and what doesn't need to be on site.
Given that you were just brought up expectations, I'm going to do something a little different. Let's go and open the next question as well, and then folks can answer either or both together, because it's really the same thing, isn't it? At some level, like when you're talking about the details about having a job be on site or off site, it's the expectations that are the key point in that, right? For me, I applied for and accepted a fully remote position, or a position that was eligible for fully remote. So those considerations had already been made. Those decisions had already been made. The team had other remote employees. I had a remote contractor and had a remote employee, and then had others that used to work on campus but now don't anymore because they either have moved or have other reasons not to go back to campus every day. How about anyone else on the panel? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, one thing I've noticed is the pandemic was a great trial run for a lot of people. There are a lot of companies out there that are now saying everybody come back, that you mentioned before, Jeff, but there are other companies that liked that everybody was still, or not everybody, but people that were productive at work were productive also remote. So they've kind of adopted this new mentality. So it really depends on the culture of the company to determine if you need to be on site or not. So I've seen a lot of companies of friends of mine that they can be remote. The job type is very remote focused job. It's a cloud job, but the company wants them on site. So a lot of that is a big factor in this. But I love the fact that the pandemic kind of showed that more people can be remote and still get a lot of work done and a job done. So I think that also goes into the expectation piece of figuring out, you just have to communicate that, write down your expectations, have them listed, and both the members, the employee and the supervisor, agree to them. And sometimes the remote piece is a factor in some of those expectations, but sometimes it's not. It really depends on the job description.
Excellent points. I'm going to cut this one a little short, I think, because we need to get enough time in for Q&A from the audience. The audience has done a great job attending today, and you know, they've probably got lots of questions they've been saving up, and I want to give them a chance to. So unless there's any quick other points that someone has, then I'd love to get to the audience Q&A if folks think that's okay. I'm seeing nods. So all right. So we've got one here that's the most recent one that came into the chat from Molly, and I'm going to read out her question, and then we'll see what folks have to say about that one. So, how are other campuses addressing the issue of retention of staff? At UC Merced, we are losing staff to fully remote positions at other UC campuses. That's from Molly Alizier.
So I think it's it's an issue for all of higher ed. It's not even just a UC campus issue. Higher ed traditionally has been more of an on-premise kind of structure, with the idea that you need to be present and front-facing for students and for faculty, and regardless of what type of role or what department you're in. I think there's been always a little bit more flexibility in IT, but even in IT in higher ed, it's this idea that you are on site to do your job. And so I think with the pandemic and the idea grew with our staff who work in higher ed that I can do my job anywhere. And if higher ed campus is not going to support me, not only do I have the option to look for another job in the city that I live in or the state I live in, I have the opportunity to look sometimes internationally for opportunities. And so that puts a lot of pressure on us as higher ed organizations, again, that maybe we might not be able to compete on a salary or benefits perspective. And we just have a lot of strikes against us. And now we're adding in this resistance to remote work. And so I actually read an article, and I'm going to find the link so Jeff can add it to our resource things. I recently read an article about how do we make our careers in higher ed more attractive to people. And one of the points in there was this idea of we can no longer lean on what we did in the past, which was this connection with people about our missions, our mission to reach students, our mission to further research, our mission to provide equitable education opportunities. That was the thing that we could use to get people to come to us. That's no longer a strong enough driver to meet against the desire for folks to have flexibility in their work arrangements, to have the salaries that they feel like they deserve, to have the benefits that they feel like they deserve. And so if we can no longer rely on, pulling on the heartstrings of those who agree with our mission and our passion, we're going to have to find some flexibility in the things that we can control. We can't control budget because, we're all at the, at least in the UC, we're at the mercy of the state budget oftentimes. We can't really do anything around benefits and what we offer, but what we can do is we can be flexible, and we can really look at our jobs and say, this job does not need to be 100% on site. We can allow some flexibility there, and that's something that we can potentially then compete with not only other UCs, but other higher eds and other companies in the private industry again, because now, again, the world is our competition for staff.
Oh yeah, and a lot of opportunity, right? That you could hire someone that maybe wasn't available before, but then they also have choices that they could go to work for other employers when it's time in their career to grow and shift. I think Sarah wanted to answer this one as well.
So I wanted to answer the follow-up question that Bill asked in the chat about how can we challenge that type of thinking with leadership. I have a very specific answer for this, and that is that we need to flip this to be a positive problem. And what I mean by that is Jeff and I are great examples actually of what Berkeley can do with their position, and all the UC campuses actually. So Jeff and I both, I'm going to speak for Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but Jeff and I both came from other universities where we were being called back for either hybrid or fully in-person work. And that is one of the main factors that encouraged us to apply and eventually come to Berkeley. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to be clear. Berkeley and all the UC campuses are in one of the most amazingly beneficial positions or situations for positions that are possibly remote. And the way that we can challenge that type of negative thinking with leadership is to explain to those people, if you hire people for remote jobs that can be remote, you have the opportunity to hire the best of the best across the country and maybe the world. So instead of limiting your search to people who are nearby, who don't have to move, you can search the entire country, and you can attract high talent because the people who are allowed to join Berkeley and work remotely are being paid a California salary, but they're living in a lower cost of living location. That is a huge attraction for someone who can do their job remotely. And for Berkeley, it means, I'm not going to say that we should lower the salaries for people who are in lower cost of living places. That is not the point, but to realize that you have the opportunity to hire talent at the same pay that you're paying local employees. But these are people who potentially would have not been able to go to, like, I don't think I could have afforded to move to California. And that's one of the reasons why I remain remote right now. And that probably would have prevented me from taking my job at Berkeley because I would have had such an expensive move just to get out there. And once I was there, the money would not necessarily have been comparable to the money that I was making in Cleveland. So my point is, this is an opportunity for Berkeley and other UC campuses to attract the best of the best across the country for jobs that can be done remotely. Now, the problem, of course, is for hybrid people or people who need to be in person, there can be a really strong feeling of resentment for those people. And I think the reality is that we have to expect and anticipate that there's going to be a high turnover in this current environment. And that's kind of what all the articles that we've linked to and all the information that we've provided in the document that Jeff shared, what those articles are saying is hybrid is in demand and hybrid is here to stay at a minimum. And the campuses need to get on board, or the talent that they're attracting is not going to be as good as it could be, and they're going to be even less competitive with other universities in the country than they already are. So that's what I mean by making it a positive situation. Berkeley, California should use its position financially to attract high talent.
Well, it seems like you really wanted to answer that question and have some strong feelings about that one. Yeah, I personally heard rumblings about return to office, and I was like, but I really like working at home with 6 monitors, and like the setup that I've been able to get going here, you know, and like, oh, I got the cushy chair. Well, now it's not super cushy, but like I got a cushion for the chair, and now it's kind of cushy and whatever, and I'm pretty happy about it. But some people have different situations, and I totally respect that, and that people have different situations that they're facing either at work or at home, and we've been going through a pandemic, so there've been all kinds of trauma and stress that people have had from loved ones, even themselves if they've had medical issues and all kinds of things. So there's lots of feelings that people have had. So with a pinch of salt, I've been reading these different articles about remote work and about the Great Resignation and all this stuff. And it's like, some of it's like, some people are saying like, well, workers are more productive, and sometimes they're saying workers are less productive. I'm thinking like, well, there was like all this like sadness and trauma that people were dealing with from people dying and whatever else, like there's a whole undercurrent of other stuff that was going on. So it's not just like, you know, did you switch from working on campus to working remotely and get as much done or not? It's incomparable because there was another confounding factor involved, right? We've got some great questions in the chat. I want to make sure we get to some more of these. So we had Deauville, her question that Sarah responded to. Let's see what else we can pull out from the chat there.
While you look at those questions, Jeff, somebody asked to see my dog cartoon. So, oh no, come on. All right, it's blank. It's a blank cartoon.
No, it's not. Well, I want to call out Elisa's point that she made, that she's in HR at UC Berkeley, and some of the departments that do have the flexibility have been allowing fully remote to address recruitment issues. But she also has departments she's working with who have to be on site, but they're allowing hybrid to be able to retain and recruit. And starting salaries have been a bit higher to be more competitive as well. Oh, and Molly mentioned that with the geo difference in salaries, that some staff members working in the Central Valley have been instead looking towards remote positions at one of the campuses, Berkeley or LA, UCLA. Let's see what else we've got in here. Do you know about the rules about working internationally? Ooh, I think that was more open before, and then it's changed somewhat now. But
Jeff, they've got some great answers in the chat for that question.
Well, all right, people. All right.
Jeff, one of the things I did want to kind of bring forward, because I think it comes up a lot, especially when you start talking about like leadership's hesitation with remote or hybrid work, is that oftentimes that comes from a lack of skills and training around managing in general. And I think that one of the things organizations can do is really invest in their managers and their supervisors, and really making sure that they have the skills to manage employees as a whole, because that really comes into play and becomes a big deficit once you then move to trying to manage remote workers. Because I know we've all had the experience of maybe a colleague or someone we worked with, and them being on site and not being productive. So it can happen on-prem, just like it can happen remote or hybrid. And I think it's just a lot of times we have moved historically managers and supervisors into their roles without necessarily giving them the support and the training that they need to become really good managers. And then when you start to have conversations about should we let our staff be remote or not, the instinctiveness is that no, they need to be here because I need to manage them. But that often, again, is rooted in not having the skills to manage staff in general. And then feeling like, how am I going to then apply that to a remote staff member? So I think that's something that really needs to be focused on. It's going to be really difficult to have successful cultures and successful relationships with the gamut of employees from on-site all the way through fully remote if you don't have the skills and the knowledge to manage. And then on the other side of the house, from employees standpoints, you also need to give them the skills and the training necessary to, again, be successful in that remote or hybrid environment, the skills to build relationships, to communicate. It just takes a lot of intention and focus. And so our organizations are going to really have to invest in our people in order to make this work, because like Sarah said, it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And so how do we then make sure that we are as successful as possible?
Well, thank you for that very thoughtful question, answer. And we also had a great answer in the chat from Clarissa, mentioning that we should think not only about the attracting new employees, but also think about the current employees, the folks that are there, and what can be done to help incentivize and motivate and encourage and help them grow. And they've also been facing these same challenges, during the pandemic, like all of us have. And anyway, I hope that this session has been helpful. We've got a poll that we've opened up to just to kind of help us figure out if we've swayed anyone one way or another as a result of this panel. And all the perspectives are valid in there. No worries about that. We've shared a link. I reshared the link again to the resources document we have. I'm going to go and double check, make sure all the links are working and everything, because I'm just pulling those together pretty quickly. But if anyone else has any other suggestions for things that should be in there, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I'll try to add those in so that everyone can benefit from those shared resources. And well, there you go. 73% strongly in favor, 9% in favor, 18% were neutral. All the folks who were opposed earlier either changed their mind or they dropped off. So I'm not sure which, but I'd like to think that they switched to strongly in favor. But thank you so much, everybody. Not only to our moderator Michael and to the Now Conference and Erica, who helped us with the polls, but also to all of the panelists, Sarah, Clarissa, Charron, and Robert. And we've got an evaluation that you can go and complete by using the QR code. And then now it's time for lunch for folks. And after lunch, there's going to be networking and nosh. And let's see, there's another option of staff organizations informational rooms. And after that, then there'll be even more sessions in the afternoon. So stick around and keep learning and keep growing and find your next opportunity for work. And thank you very much for spending the time with us. I'm Jeff Williams, and thank you so much.